She was more than just a princess. She was the heart of millions. Wherever she went, people smiled, cried, and reached out their hands just to touch her. She wasn't perfect, but she was real. As she laughed with the poor, hugged sick children, and broke every royal rule with kindness. Princess Diana was called the people's princess for a reason. Everyone loved her. Everyone watched her. But on one dark night in Paris, everything changed in one horrifying second. And in that second, the world would lose her forever. It was August 31st, 1997. Diana was in Paris with Dodi Al-Fad, the man she was dating. Cameras followed them everywhere. Paparazzi were waiting outside the Ritz Hotel where they had dinner. So they made a plan. They would leave through the back door. They hoped no one would follow. But Diana was too famous to disappear. The photographers were already chasing them by the time they stepped into the black Mercedes. The car moved fast, too fast. Their driver, Henry Paul, was trying to escape the paparazzi. He wanted to protect Diana. He wanted to get her out of danger. But his decision would only bring more danger. As the car entered the Pont de Lama tunnel, something terrible happened. The driver lost control. The black Mercedes slammed into a concrete pillar. The sound was deafening. Glass shattered. And then silence. Inside the tunnel, it was like time had stopped. The car was destroyed. Smoke rose from the front. The doors were twisted and broken. Dodi and the driver were killed instantly. In the back seat, Diana was still alive, but just barely outside the tunnel. People had no idea what had happened. Tourists walked by, taking photos of the Eiffel Tower. Cars passed on the street above. But inside that tunnel, something tragic was unfolding, a moment that would change history. Emergency. Services were called right away. Firefighters and paramedics raced toward the crash site. One of the first to arrive was firefighter Xavier Gourmelin. He'd answered many emergency calls before. He had seen accidents. He had seen people in pain. But tonight felt different. He didn't know why until he looked into the back seat of the broken car. There was a woman there. Her face was hurt. Blood covered her hands and arms, but she was alive. He moved toward her quickly. Didn't know it was Princess Diana. To him, she was just someone who needed help, a human being in pain. He reached out, placed his hands under her shoulders, and held her steady so she could breathe. She opened her eyes. For a second, they looked at each other. And then, in a soft voice, she said something no one around him heard it. The noise from the tunnel and the flashing lights made everything confusing, but he did. He heard it clearly. She said, "Oh my God, what's happened?" That was all. Just 6 words. But those words would stay with him for the rest of his life. Xavier didn't know it yet, but he was the last person to ever hear Princess Diana speak. A single blue light still glowed on the ruined dashboard, blinking like a weak heartbeat inside the wrecked Mercedes. That little light drew firefighter Xavier Gourmelin's eyes back to the woman in the rear seat. She was breathing, but every breath sounded like a small sigh of pain. The tunnel echoed with sirens and camera shutters. Paparazzi had arrived even before some rescuers. Yelling and snapping photos as if this nightmare were a show, Xavier felt anger rise in his chest. He shouted for police to push the photographers back. Yet flashes kept exploding through the smoke, turning each second into a wild storm of light. He forced himself to focus. With one quick motion, he cut away Diana's seatbelt. The metal clasp was bent. It took all his strength. The belt finally snapped loose. Diana's body sagged toward him. He slid one arm under her shoulders, careful and gentle, the way a father lifts a sleeping child. Her head rested against his coat. For a heartbeat, she opened her eyes against soft gray blue, confused, shining with tears. He spoke to her in French, simple words he hoped she could understand. "You are safe. We are here." She tried to speak, but her lips only trembled. Another firefighter, Frederick, climbed into the wreckage from the passenger side. Together they checked her pulse. It was fast, fluttering like a bird trapped in a hand. Blood flowed from a cut near her scalp. They wrapped a bandage around her head, but fresh red kept soaking through the white cloth. Xavier called on his radio for advanced medical gear, oxygen, defibrillator, anything. His fingers shook while he talked. He had saved lives before. Yet tonight his nerves felt thin as paper. Outside the tunnel entrance, more police cars screeched to a stop. Officers formed a wall to block the photographers. The flashing bulbs faded at last, leaving only red and blue emergency lights dancing across the tunnel walls. Ambulance doors slammed. Paramedic Sophie Dubois hurried over with an oxygen mask and a yellow spinal board. She handed Xavier the mask. He placed it over Diana's face. Cool oxygen hissed, and Diana's chest rose a little steadier, but her pulse still raced. They had to move her fast, yet one wrong lift could break damaged bones or tear hidden wounds. Frederick slid. In a neck brace, locking it tight, and with slow, practiced moves, they eased her onto the spinal board. She moaned one small, broken sound that made every rescuer freeze for half a second. Xavier swallowed hard. "Most there," he whispered. Suddenly a loud clang echoed behind them. A loose piece of the car roof cut by the crash fell too. The floor sent sparks flying. Everyone jerked at the noise. For a terrible instant they feared fire. 2 firefighters jumped with extinguishers, but the metal only hissed and cooled. Still, the smell of burnt wiring filled the air, stinging their eyes and throats. They began the long walk out of the tunnel.
Ow.
Each step felt like a mile. Xavier held the board at Diana's head, Frederick at her feet, Sophie on one side reading. Vital signs. Diana's eyelids fluttered. Her hand twitched, searching for something. Xavier bent closer. She gripped his gloved thumb, weak but certain, as if that single touch were a promise that she would not be left alone. He squeezed back, fighting the ache in his chest. Outside, night air rushed over them, cool, damp, carrying the distant of Paris traffic. Blue ambulance lights strobed across rows of shocked onlookers. Some people gasped when they recognized the woman on the stretcher. Others covered their mouths, tears spilling down. Few kept shouting questions, begging. For answers, no one could give. The ambulance doors flew open. They slid the board inside. Sophie climbed in, pressing stethoscope to chest, adjusting 4 lines. Xavier stayed by the doors, still holding Diana's hand until the very last moment. "Stay with us," he urged. It was only the flicker of passing lights. "Go," a paramedic yelled to the driver. The doors slammed. Tires squealed. Sirens wailed, echoing through river bridges and stone alleys, racing toward Pity-Salpêtrière Hospital. Xavier stood frozen, chest heaving. The tunnel behind him was now a grave for 2 souls. Ahead, the ambulance became a shrinking point. Of red light, he whispered a prayer he had not spoken since childhood, hoping it would carry through city streets to the woman who had squeezed his thumb, hoping it would be enough to keep her alive until dawn. He did not know that history was already writing a cruel line none of them could erase. The ambulance rushed through the dark streets of Paris, its siren screaming like a warning to the whole world. Inside, Princess Diana lay still on the stretcher. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing had slowed. Paramedic Sophie sat beside her, watching the monitors, checking her heartbeat, her oxygen, her blood pressure. Every second mattered. Time was moving fast, but so was the danger. Her injuries were worse than they had thought. Diana's chest had been crushed in the crash. A major blood vessel near her heart was torn, but no one knew yet. She was bleeding inside, silently, dangerously. At the same moment, the city outside was starting to wake up. Reporters were whispering rumors. "There's been a crash, a car in a tunnel. Princess Diana might be involved." But no one had the full truth. Inside the hospital, doctors prepared everything. The moment the ambulance arrived, they were ready. Machines beeped. Stretchers rolled. Nurses opened doors. And then Diana was rushed in. Doctors cut away her clothes. They placed wires and tubes all over her body. She was pale. She was cold. She had lost too much blood. They gave her a transfusion. They tried to restart her heart. For a moment they did. Her heart beat again, but not for long. Then it stopped. Inside the trauma room, everything froze. Doctor called out, "Cardiac arrest." They began chest compressions. Another team member grabbed a defibrillator. The first shock jolted her body. Her arms lifted slightly, nothing. Second shock. Her chest jumped again. Still no heartbeat. It was now a race against time. They had to open her chest. It was a rare, desperate move, but there was no choice. A surgeon made a fast cut, trying to find the bleeding inside. And there, it was a torn blood vessel near the heart. It was too late. Too much blood had already been lost. Her heart had stopped beating. Her brain had gone without oxygen for too long. Still, they didn't give up. For more than an hour, they fought to bring her back. A room full of people worked in silence, except for the beeping machines and whispered commands. But at 4 a.m., the chief doctor stepped back. He looked at the clock. He said the words no one wanted to hear. She's gone. Princess Diana, the people's princess, had died. Outside the hospital, the world still didn't know. Xavier Gormelin, the firefighter who had held her hand, stood near the tunnel where the crash had happened. He had just found out who she was. His heart sank. The woman he thought might survive, the one who had looked into his eyes and spoken. Those 6 soft words was now gone. He remembered her face, her whisper. Oh my God, what's happened? He had heard it so clearly in the dark of the tunnel. At the time, he didn't think it would be her last words. She had seemed strong. She had seemed calm. But now, knowing the truth, his chest felt heavy. The streets of Paris were slowly filling with news vans. Journalists from around the world arrived at the hospital. Police tried to control the growing crowd. But the rumors were spreading too. Fast. The truth was getting close. When it finally came, it hit like a thunderstorm. At 5 a.m., the news broke. Princess Diana was dead. The shock went across the world in seconds. People woke up to radios and TVs telling them that their beloved Diana was gone. Some didn't believe it at first. Some cried. Others stood frozen. In London, people began placing flowers outside Kensington Palace. In Paris, strangers knelt. In the street, but in one quiet corner of the hospital, the firefighter stood alone, remembering her last breath. He didn't know if anyone else had heard what she said. Maybe he was the only one. And maybe that made him the keeper of her final message. 6 small words, spoken softly in the dark. And that was all she had left. The world woke up to silence and then heartbreak. Phones rang before sunrise. Radios played the same sad message over and over. Princess Diana is dead. People stood in shock, unable to speak. Some dropped to their knees. Others turned on the TV, hoping it was a mistake. But it wasn't. From Paris to London, from New York to Nairobi, the pain was the same. A woman who had once seemed untouchable, so full of life, beauty, and kindness, was gone. Not from sickness, not from old age, but from a sudden, violent crash inside a dark tunnel. It felt unreal, like a nightmare no one could wake from. At the scene of the crash, candles and flowers now covered the ground. Strangers wept as they stood by the cold concrete pillar where the black Mercedes had struck. Some left notes, others left teddy bears. There was only sadness in the air, and inside one small firehouse in Paris. Firefighters Xavier Gormelin sat quietly, replaying that night in his mind. Again and again, he heard her voice. Those 6 words, oh my God, what's happened? That was it. Her final words. He hadn't known who she was at first. But once he did, everything changed. He realized he had held the most loved woman in the world during her final minutes. She had died not on a throne, not in a palace, but in his arms inside a broken car on a lonely Paris road. For years, Xavier said nothing. He didn't tell the world what she had whispered. He didn't seek attention. He simply carried the memory in his heart. But the memory grew heavy, like a secret too painful to keep. So finally, many years later, he spoke. In a quiet interview, he revealed her last words. Simple, scared, human, not royal, not dramatic. Just real. And when the world heard those words, it broke all over again. People imagined her confusion, her fear, her not knowing how badly she was hurt. She had thought she would survive. She had trusted the rescuers. She had believed she still had time, but she didn't. Doctors later said her injuries were hidden deep inside. No one, not even the firefighters or paramedics, could have known how serious they were. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She stayed calm, graceful, even in pain, just like she always was. Across the UK, a sea of flowers grew outside Kensington Palace. Millions came to say goodbye. Some stood for hours in the rain. Mothers came with children. Elderly couples held hands. Men cried openly. It was not just a death, it was a loss of hope, of kindness, of something pure. And in that sea of grief, those 6 words became something powerful. Oh my God, what's happened? A sentence so soft, but it carried the weight of history. It showed that even someone like Diana Strong, famous, loved, was just human in the end. Just like the rest of us, Queen Elizabeth later called Diana an exceptional and gifted human being. Prince Charles flew to Paris to bring her body home. Her 2 sons, William and Harry, walked behind her coffin during the funeral. They were only boys, trying to be strong for the cameras. But their eyes were filled with pain the world could not forget. That day, bells rang across Britain. Streets stood still. Millions watched on television. The whole world cried together. And somewhere in the background, away from the lights and the crowds, one man stood quietly. A firefighter, stranger to Diana, yet forever a part of her story. He never asked for fame. He never asked to be remembered. But through him, her final breath lives on. Because sometimes history isn't written by kings or queens. Sometimes it's written by a whisper in the dark, and a voice that asked a question no one could answer. Oh my God, what's happened? That was her goodbye, and the world still hears it.